We wanted to kill them, the same way as they wanted to kill us.
Scum. Nothing but scum.
Oh, hatred of the police, definitely. I'm honest, with a vengeance. I hated them. I hated what they'd done to my brothers. I hated them.
3 weeks before the riots, we said to him, if you don't do something, something's going to go off.
In late 2012, the University of Liverpool approached KCC Live about making a programme on the riots that took place in Liverpool in 2011 and 1981. This is what we found.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I got involved in the project. I'm really interested in the riots, and I'm really interested just about social commentary and how people react and things like that. I've got a youth working background, so that kind of viewpoint really came into it, how the community reacted, and my interest for that really grew.
I'm Nilu and I'm 17 and I go to sixth form, and I've never made a documentary before being involved in interviewing people, so that was a great opportunity. But as time gone, I've realised how valuable it's actually been to learn so much about something that happens in our community and that I should really know more about.
My name is Dan Etheridge. Before we started the Riots project, I didn't really think much about the riots. They didn't really affect me, and I didn't really know anyone that was involved in it, but I heard lots of stories.
Hi, I'm Claire, I'm 21, and I also got approached while doing voluntary work at KCC Live, and I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to find out more about the riots.
I'm Jess, I'm 18. As I didn't know much about the riots, I took this as an opportunity to learn more about them.
Yeah, we spoke to a few people at the start, found out what their general thoughts were, gleaned some kind of first impression of what the general public felt about the riots.
Absolutely terrible.
How to describe those involved? There's a lot of harsh words to describe those involved. I would be tempted to say misunderstood, but I think it's a lot worse than that.
Scum. Nothing but scum and horrible. They should do a life sentence or something.
Whose fault were the 1980 ones?
Yes, Toxteth riots, race riots. Whose fault were those? It depends what angle you look at it, because some people think it's down to the police, and other people will argue that, well, the people involved started the riots in the first place, so surely it's down to them.
My father was a part of, or at least involved in some aspect of the riots due to high unemployment rates at that time.
Everyone was pretty much undecided, and then we started talking to people who were involved in the 1981 riots.
Police officer John Murphy.
I think the causal factor in 1981 was a combination of things: poverty, disadvantaged young people, particularly disadvantaged young black people, lack of opportunity for them, lack of jobs for them, and disenchantment with the police.
Council worker Paul Peng.
The 81 riots, well, they were a direct response to that exclusion that people in particular Liverpool 8 area, black people in the main, there was a lot of what we would say total exclusion from thought, progress.
Wally Brown was a youth worker during the 81 riots.
The young people would always say to me, Wally, it's not about the jobs or other things. We can deal with, we handle that. It's the police. The main issue is the police.
Oh, hatred of the police, definitely. I'm honest, with a vengeance. I hated them. I hated what they'd done to my brothers.
Michael Simon was a rioter in 81.
I mean, if I think about it, even probably from the age of 10, I got stopped and searched. I remember coming home from somewhere, and just as the bus pulled up, a police van pulled up, and just had me up against the wall.
The police used to park their jeeps on the boulevard, so the kids had to go past them, and the kids would often come in the youth club as they were going home and say, Wally, do me a favour, just stand on the corner here and watch us as we walk past the police so we don't get harassed. Now, there's the police who are supposed to be protecting people, and young people asking me to protect them going past the police.
And so, like, that wasn't unusual. I remember getting on the... But I remember feeling more embarrassed, like, because... really weird. I remember feeling embarrassed about what they were doing, like, in front of everyone. So, that was the type of thing that you grew up with, like, so... I mean, I know my brothers just after them all the time, the mates, like, it was just, you know, and in the end, like, you'd run away and that'd make it worse.
BBC Radio Merseyside, Roger Phillips.
If you weren't a policeman, apart from that, you were nobody. The police just thought they ruled, and that was it. It was a very, very, in my view, an awful time for policing.
The fact is, sadly, young black youth particularly is disadvantaged, do suffer very acute levels of poverty, and consequently are far more liable to get sucked in crime. It's not because they're black, it's because they're disadvantaged and they happen to be black. So that is always going to cause a problem.
But you've got to remember, if you look now at what's taking place now with the police and people and the police behaviour in terms of Hillsborough and what's happening now with police behaviour, people now are seeing the police as, well, maybe the police aren't as straight as we thought. We were saying that in 81. We were saying in 81 that the police were dishonest, the police were fitting people up, and the police were harassing young people. And nobody would believe, oh, the police couldn't do that, oh, the police, you know, it must be all those troublemakers. So nobody believed what we were saying.
I think it was, everyone realised it was the opportunity to fight back.
This time is coming like a ghost town. All the clubs are being closed down. This place is coming like a ghost town. Bands won't play no more. Too much fighting on the dance floor.
And then it all kicked off in July.
'81, the first really flare up, it was, you probably know, it was over a guy called Leroy Cooper, but my brother-in-law, also the guy who was married to my sister, was with him at the time, and he was the one that was originally got pulled over by the motorbike. So, you know, a flock of people for the first time kind of started fighting back against the police, and it just escalated from there.
One personal experience was I was the end of a road that doesn't exist anymore called St Nathaniel Street. That's where the women's hospital is now built, at the back of Upper Parliament Street. And we were stood under a tenement block, and somebody pushed a big television off the tenement block, and it hit the officer stood next to me, split his head open, broke his shoulder and knocked him unconscious. And somebody came from behind and just dragged him away, and to this day I don't know who it was, but that happened right in front of my eyes. If it had been another 6 inches, it probably would have been me.
And it was so intense. The type of things, you know, I remember seeing my mate jumping on top of a jeep with a hammer, and I just thought, it's great. And it just sounds terrible, doesn't it? But I just thought, that's great. Because you knew then, like, that, you know, your mate feels the same as you.
There were some officers who behaved inappropriately. I would say they were small numbers from what I saw, but then again, everybody modifies their behaviour dependent on the tolerance of the group that they're with.
A guy got killed, don't know what he's know about this, his name is David Moore, he was disabled and he was running away and he got killed. No one was ever out to account for killing him, and he chased this guy. We wanted to kill them, the same way as they wanted to kill us.
Council worker Paul Peng.
I think at that time the police response was more trying to control rather than to understand, and their control was to do with carrying out the policy of the government at the time, which essentially was all about keeping local people excluded from some of the things that they should have been included in.
I'm sure you've seen footage of the riots from the television. When the riots were on, the police were not in a position to arrest anybody or to intervene. The police were pretty well on the back foot. So the police were dependent on when young people decided they wanted to go home, they went home. And it was when people had stopped rioting and decided to go home that the police then began to make arrests. But what they did, they arrested anybody they could get their hands on. And you can appreciate, for everyone who was rioting, there was 10 or 20 watching.
I don't know if I could say the violence was justified, but I think the organised response to what was going on at the time, the policies, that was justified.
You can't justify the kind of violence that took place in 81 and what happened, and people who were injured and things. You can't justify that totally.
You're quite hostile. I got a right to be hostile, man. My people been persecuted.
I think Michael Simon had the most to say, and probably the most right to say it as well, because he was right there. He saw things with his own eyes that motivated him to behave violently, and he doesn't even seem to regret it now. Like, you know, he's an adult, so I felt a lot of respect for what he was saying, even though at times it was quite controversial, quite outspoken, you know.
Yeah, I think Wally as well, Wally Brown. It was just nice to hear his stories as well, and as a youth worker at the time. And he seemed to be dead on about why everyone was rioting, and people would come to him and say, this is why we're unhappy. So I think he gave a nice little point.
Yeah, I agree that like Michael Simon and Wally Brown had like the best like descriptions of the riots, like how they actually happened, and actually give a reason why they happened as well.
Going by what people said, I think it was the result of the police and what they were doing. I don't think it was racially targeted at certain races, I would say, because of the majority of black people being poor. It was obviously targeted at poor people.
No, not at all. I don't. John Murphy said that, and I absolutely don't agree with the notion that they just happened to be black and it wasn't racially motivated, because from everyone you heard, you know, there was racist attitudes in the police force. And you know, Michael Simon, we spoke to him about it. You know, he lives in an area where there were black people and white people, but he got he bore the brunt of it as him and his family, because they were mixed race.
There's a lot of talk about the police being the main responsibility causing the riots, and I would like to believe that it wasn't racially motivated. I'd like to believe that it was more because of the social state that these people were in. Where it happened, it was a very deprived area, and I think even if I was living in a deprived area and I had no job, I had no prospect, you know, people were coming at me left, right and centre, accusing me for whatever, then I think I would be pushed to a limit.
Yeah, I think the media is important in the way that they shape people's perceptions, obviously, because a lot of people listen to the media, so obviously if they're portraying it in a certain way, then that's what they're going to pick up on.
Well, to be honest, I look back at it in hindsight, obviously, because I was in prison for about 2 months afterwards, so I didn't see no media, and they certainly didn't let me see it there. It was completely media blackout where we were. But looking back on it, I mean, and I do remember people saying, you know, it was terrible the way they covered it. But the Liverpool Echo, you know, kind of printed an interview with Ken Oxford at the time that said, all mixed race people, you know, the mothers are prostitutes and the dads are African seamen. That's the type of attitude that the media had in Liverpool.
BBC Radio Merseyside, Roger Phillips.
In 81, I don't think we probably did as good a job, partly because we were frightened and we didn't know how to get interviews with people who had got things right around their face and were throwing things, and it was very hairy out there on the streets. The problem is, in those days, the police didn't come to us. The police press office didn't respond. No police officer was allowed to speak to the media. There was a press office, but it didn't do anything.
I think for 1981, the media was a bit like Chinese whispers in respects of people weren't responding, actual organisations, the police wasn't responding, and as Roger Phillips says, it was all about, you know, we were all a bit frightened, so we kind of had to just pick up what we could pick up and respond to the way, you know, you would humanly respond.
I think Roger kind of put the the feelings across that the police didn't want to put everything out there that was going on. It's like they didn't want to get the rioters' point of view across. They didn't want to put it out there that this is their story. They wanted to totally focus it on, oh, the police, this is what they're dealing with.
And yeah, and all the atrocities that happen, like, oh, it's so terrible, look at all these vicious people, savages.
And not look at it, well, actually, this is the reason why it is.
Wally Brown.
When you bear in mind that Toxteth is about a mile or so from the city centre, and you go to Liverpool 1 and you look round, and so many black people you see working in the shops. You could go anywhere in town, so many black people you see working in the shops. Why, if they're walking to Liverpool, why aren't they working in the shops? Go to Manchester, go to Deansgate, go to the Arndale Centre. So many black people working in the shops in Manchester. And we've been battling that one, because that was one of the things that writes about people getting jobs in this. We've been trying to win 40 years. I'm still involved in dealing with that now, and we can't change it.
The impact it had is, I was proud of what happened. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I was absolutely proud of what happened, proud of what we've done. It's disappointing with what happened to the area we live in, and the football, you can still walk around now and things that still haven't been repaired. There's still empty plots where I knew the shop got burnt down. But that wasn't us. What we done was completely different, I think, as far as that. That was just a consequence of what happened. But, don't say that about the Second World War and all them buildings, do we?
Why is Toxteth being so neglected? The riots in 81, the main with Liverpool, Brixton and Moss Side. If you've ever been to Brixton is vibrant. And since the riot, it's been developed. Go to Manchester. In Moss Side, that's been redeveloped twice since the riot. Toxteth is worse now than it was in 1981.
The public sector response was poor at first, but after the 81 riots, the local council recognised that there was quite a fair bit of underrepresentation, and their response was to say to the Black Caucus at the time, if you can establish yourselves as a bona fide organisation, we'll give a contract to the first organisation that can set up to try and redress the imbalance, firstly within the council as far as employment was concerned, and then other organisations might come on board, like housing associations, law practices, the architectural practices in the city. So to some extent the response was as a consequence of the riot.
I think that now there's more organisations pushing it for, for equality and everything, and I've never found myself in a situation where I think, oh my god, we're still living in a but obviously racism is still there, but I've never come across it as in my experiences. Do you know what I mean? It might be because the area I live in.
But you still didn't address the cries and the attention needed for the people, and I don't think there was a lot of development on that. People further down the class rank are not listened to.
Yeah, I think there was a general change in attitude in Toxteth, or for Toxteth, after the 81 up until the 2011. But I think perhaps later on maybe the attitude changed again as we led up to the 2011 riots.
Wally Brown.
The 2011 riots were simply a copy of what was taking place in London, and as you know, that started things, and then it went around the country and it came to Liverpool.
Council worker Paul Peng.
I don't think the reasons were similar in the 2011 riots. I think they were more to do with what was happening with regard to the welfare reform situation that we find ourselves in now 2 years later. People saw that coming and people knew that they were going to be excluded.
Chief Constable John Murphy.
The reason it happened again in Toxteth, not very long before the riots, the local papers ran 5 pages of stories commemorating the 30th anniversary of the riots, and we refused to take part in that because we said there's nothing to celebrate here, and all this is doing is putting it back into people's consciousness. So young people were more than aware that in 1981, way before they were born, Toxteth was the place for riots, and that actually is something that the people of Toxteth took exception to.
Some of that was just simply, let's do it because the opportunity's there, and others were massing to do something about it.
It was very different, and in fact, even the police would say Liverpool wasn't really a violent riot in terms of what took place. around the rest of the country.
The kid who brought a knife to school was the coolest in the class. Well, he learned a little lesson there, that violence had a chance. It might not be the parenting or big council estates, it might be the Conservatives that really kids are shooting on my road today. Guns have flooded the streets and we blame it all on 50 Cent and point all the guns at him.
Michael Simon.
It's quite easy to say, like, you know, oh, that was just kids doing that, but I live on Lodge Lane and it happened right outside my house, and kind of I watched it unfold, and the level of violence was nowhere near, but it did go to a point where it was the same thing, and I recognised certain things that were happening, but when I seen it reported in the papers the next day, it didn't correspond to what I seen at all. And that's the danger, like, you know, and especially when I hear politicians saying, well, you know, in 81 at least they had a reason to do it, it was political, and things saying that at the time, you know, they weren't, you know, like, and all of a sudden now saying, so to say these kids in 2011 didn't have any politics behind them, what do I know? I'm an old man now, what do I know about what they did? Of course there might have been politics, just not in the same way.
There's enough parallels to suggest that the riots that were so-called copycat riots, you know, could have been stemmed from similar situations as 81. The way the politicians were talking about what happened at the riots, it was quite patronising, quite condescending. Thinking about it now, it kind of dehumanised the rioters, didn't talk about them as individuals, like a solid frenzied mass kind of thing, and it was more about how we're going to deal with this as a nation. It made them into social pariahs that the rest of the UK, you know, have to put up with and have to clean up the mess of.
And would that not anger the rioters more? Like, oh, the branding them as this type of person, and all the words that David Cameron was using in that speech that he did. Would that not just infuriate the rioters more to think, well, actually, I'm angry and I'm going to do something about it?
Let me first of all completely condemn the scenes that we have seen on our television screens and people have witnessed in their communities. These are sickening scenes of people looting, vandalising, thieving, robbing, scenes of people attacking police officers. This is criminality, pure and simple, and it has to be confronted and defeated. And I have this very clear message to those people who are responsible for this wrongdoing and criminality. You will feel the full force of the law. And if you are old enough to commit these crimes, you are old enough to face the punishments.
So come on, David Cameron, show us how it's done. And if you hug me one more time, I'll stab you in the arm. Oh, and he'll punch you in the face, you stupid. Oh, aches. If you give me some money, then I might not nick your phone. But don't tell me you give about anyone but your own.
Most of the young people in Liverpool who were involved were very young. They thought it was a game. They thought it was like trick or treat. They didn't really understand what they were getting themselves involved in. It was like a big game to them. And we used to say to them, look, you know, you're going to get arrested. This is not a game.
No, you know, to be honest, the police who I seen looked like they were really enjoying themselves.
One of the two other issues that are very different from 1981 was in 1981 officers had no protective clothing, so we went into a riot situation. We had no crash hats, we had no shields to start with, even we had nothing. By the time 2011 came round, officers are very well equipped to deal with that kind of situation.
I
think the reactions were very similar. Let's contain it, let's close it off, let's shut it down. And it wasn't, let's have a chat and let's find out why people are doing these things.
The big difference, I guess, the easiest way to describe it is, in 1981 it was us and them, and us was the police, and them was everybody else. And in 2011, the police worked very closely with the community and mobilised against a group of people that were intent on causing trouble, and snuffed it out very quickly in Liverpool. In 2011, those who were intent on riots were in small groups and were very mobile. They didn't get together in one big mob, and that actually made it quite difficult to handle.
BBC Radio Merseyside, Roger Phillips.
Again, completely different in the last year, where the police are only too keen to speak. In fact, they want to speak too much to us, and we want to keep them off the air. Yes, I would say last year everybody's voice was heard. The people who had their shop looted, as I say, in Liverpool, the people who were rioting away, the mothers of the people who were rioting or attempting to riot, the people who were defending the streets. TAR, it was called Toxic Against Riots, I think, I can't remember that organisation, which has continued. The police, everybody got on air one way or another on our airwaves, and everybody got reported, as far as I'm aware, in the local press.
I think from reading reports in 1981 and in 2011 and seeing it in 2011, the media, I think in terms of understanding, they were a lot better, and in terms of coverage, and I think that was caused by the results of 1981.
Everything that happened, that Michael Simon told us about how the police treated them, why did they do that? I think if I was to do this whole process again, I would take them questions to the police constable and ask him and say, well, look, this is what you said before, and here's what a rioter said what happened.
I think we'd have a lot more questions for John Murphy.
It's taught me a lot about the community itself as toxic, and how maybe people do need to pay attention of it and develop.
I think this riots project has changed my opinion on the riots, because I didn't know that much about the actual riots in 81 and 2011.
I think there's always going to be those issues of poor people. It's always going to be a situation, and it's never ever going to be solved. I think how it can be limited is best through community.
Lack of attention to the problems is a key factor in not much being done about them.
Do I expect it to happen in the future? I'd love to say it'll never happen again, but it happened again after 30 years.
If you're not inside, you can't have as much effect in changing the policies that others were writing on your behalf without you being consulted or being involved.
It's been a long time coming, but I know